Hello and welcome. My name is Val Hastings, and welcome to Pandemic Preaching. It's good to have all of you on the call. Because of the large number of people, we're asking that everyone be muted and that you keep your camera off, at least during the major part of the presentation. Certainly for us, these are really unique times, and they require some unique skills and unique ways of facing the challenges, which is why we put together Pandemic Preaching. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time doing the welcome, but to simply say that we are really pleased to have Jen Williams with us. Jen is a PCC coach, professional certified coach, and she's also a pastor. And Jen, if you would join us, unmute yourself, turn your camera on. I'd like to turn this over to you at this point, and we can begin once you are the host.
All right.
There you go, Jen. Good to see you.
Okay. Good morning. So you ready for me to share my screen, Val?
Please do. Go ahead. Yes.
All right. Here we go. And why isn't it working? So this is our first lesson, even though, there we go. Just took a minute. So our first lesson, as we get started, is that I am not an expert at this. I'm not sure that many of us are expert at pandemic preaching and preaching simply and only via video without a live audience. So welcome this morning to tell you a bit about myself. I am a coach, I am a preacher, and I am not yet a digital expert. I do have a background in theater, and my father has a degree in theater with 20 years of experience, so that is informing and helping this. And my church, not myself, my church has been doing digital ministry for 8 years. Yet we're still learning because this is a different world. And so part of this webinar I'll be sharing for my first week successes and mostly my failures with you as well, so we can all learn. So I'm also structuring this webinar to look at coaching questions. So throughout this, I'm going to have questions that will be up. We will attempt to answer them, but more it's to also get your brains thinking, because just like coaching, I do think in some ways with webinar preaching and the pandemic preaching, it's to bring it out in you. That's the best of a coach, is to bring out the best in someone else. So I'm going to be asking what I hope are powerful questions that you can take with you to inform your Sunday morning preaching from there. So the first one was, how has the gospel been communicated throughout the centuries? And I sat down to think, well, and if I was a great webinar preacher, I would have these fly in as I talk about them. So alas. So the first was, we know that the gospel has been communicated orally through storytelling. Then it was written down on parchment, which is basically hides, through the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then came Paul's letters, which were on papyrus. So now I'm going to take us on a journey through Spaceship Earth. I'm a Disney fan. I'm a pass holder this year. And for those of you who know, Spaceship Earth takes us through Western technology of basically sharing the gospel. And so after the papyrus, the spread of the gospel drastically changed with the invention of the Gutenberg Bible. And in modern day, we have, and if you're not familiar with these, I really want to tell you about the YouVersion Bible app that's provided free by Craig Groeschel's church. And why I'm also pointing it out is you can set it up each week to interact with your sermon. So while you're at home, while you're preaching, those who are watching at home can pull up your notes and can interact with you through an app. There's Bible Gateway, an internet version that's very helpful. And then what really upsets me is I spent hundreds of dollars in seminary to translate Greek and Hebrew and Strong's Thesaurus, and all of those can now be found on blueletterbible.com. So today's seminarians don't have to spend the hundreds of dollars that most of us preachers did. So today is simply the newest way in a pandemic to share the gospel. And some of the top apps for churches these days: Facebook Live, Vimeo, YouTube, and Ustream. And based upon what happened Sunday morning, Facebook Live actually buffered and crashed for about 10 minutes. It may want you to consider to use two platforms at once. We pay for, unfortunately, here's a learning aspect. We've been paying for Ustream because it was the only thing out there, and we've always done it that way. And so we use Ustream and Facebook Live. You may want to consider going to Vimeo and YouTube, which are free platforms, but then you can turn your regular watchers, those long-term parishioners, to YouTube and use Facebook as an outreach tool where you can boost your posts or boost in posts in preparation for Sunday morning to advertise. So the coaching question becomes, even in the midst of the pandemic, as coaches and pastors were to be considering, what's next? So in this time, where is the gospel going? President Trump has said he longs to see churches filled again. And yet, I'm wondering how many will actually return when they discover they can sit and watch online. So also then for us in the local church, not only where is the gospel going, how do we emphasize the connection in a world that has now become digital? And if we do this for 6 to 8 weeks, as some experts are predicting, the new normal will become a cup of coffee and pajamas. So then local church pastors, where's the gospel going for us in week 10 and 12 and next fall? Coaching question number 2 this morning. How do you interact with technology? First way to put yourself into this is imagine yourself. How do you interact when you sit down and binge watch? I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty, so that's why. So you're sitting down to binge watch. What do you do? I don't know about you, but I sit down and I'm binge watching on my television. My iPad is in front of me, usually with a Facebook video popping up, or I'm watching Facebook, or I'm on IMDb reading the trivia for what I'm watching. And my cell phone is beside me so I can text with friends. Now, how are you even working at your computer right now? How are you interacting with me? Is your email pulled up? Are your Facebook alerts always coming through? And is your cell phone beside you in case you get a text or a pastoral need pops up? Now, coaching question. How do you see those memories influencing worship this week? So that leads to, as we get into the content section this morning, as we do some content coaching, our first struggle as we go to online and pandemic preaching is how do we keep people's attention? This is going to be our biggest struggle. If you watch your Facebook analytics, people will tune in for a minute, 2 minutes, because they've got everything else going on. So we're going to go through the basics of the who, what, when, where, how to inform us on how to lead and teach in this pandemic time. So who and how? How do you believe people will worship and will be watching? That goes back to our memories of how people are already interacting with technology, because right or wrong, they're going to see worship as the same as they do with binge watching. Those kids are definitely, teenagers are definitely going to have their phones in front of them, and they're going to be Snapchatting because their parents are making them interact. And so how will that frame our worship? If they are, as the screen on the right, interacting, you see the kids got their tablet out, the teens are talking to their friends, the parents are trying to get everyone to watch it, the older people are not even sure how to interact. What style of worship will you use? Yes, we have always done formal worship, and yet, if you're a Gen Xer sitting in this room, and I attribute this to my friend Jason Moore of Midnight Oil Productions. If you're a Gen Xer or a parent who watched with your children, how did Mr. Rogers make you feel? Even though he communicated to us Gen Xers through the television, he was, I would say, one of the first true digital preachers. He brought us kids into his living room, and rather it felt like he came in to ours. He talked right to us. He slowed down his tempo, but every word was chosen to draw us into the process. So I believe that is what we need to keep in mind as we preach during this pandemic. How can we be Mr. Rogers to our congregation? What can we do? So consider people's attention span. How can you break up the worship to keep their attention? Mr. Rogers, you went to Daniel Tiger, there was the trolley, you went to Neverland, then you came back and he had a guest that you would invite in, Mr. Friendly would show up. How can we do that in worship? Break it up. What can you do? Jump from songs and scripture to a bit of a chat, to a prayer, to special music. How can you structure? Worship cannot be the way we've always done it, because the way we've always done it has been in a room where people interacted with each other. They passed the piece together. The plate came around and they handed something over, but that's not happening. So I would suggest that our traditional order of worship, not that it doesn't work, it needs to be revised for a new era. Think outside the box. Think outside the normal order. And if you're a traditionalist, I was taught at a neo-Orthodox seminary. We only learned the traditional order of worship. And yet, so if you're a traditionalist, how can you take that and use that in a digital age? How can you keep attention span? Media. Media needs to change in this time to be presented differently to reach the new audience. So keep your words clear, your fonts far from the borders, and how will it be presented and look on a screen behind you or in place of you? If you can do it in place of you, again, Jason Moore talks about, my friend, Midnight Oil Productions, that it has to be seamless transitions or people will lose their attention and they'll tune you out. So I'm going to share some fails, basically fails from my first week of worship online, and then we'll get back to interactive. All right, so this was my scripture for this week. Every background you can see tried to use that sky mountain motif to come away with Jesus. Our topic was solitude. But watch my borders here. So you see I'm too close to every border. That got cut off in digital pandemic preaching. And so my scripture got smooshed. People couldn't read all the words. My fonts, this is okay on a large screen, but not on a small screen pictured behind me. So use clear font, also use consistent fonts the entire way through. So I make some of my own sermon illustration pages. So now I'm going to have to communicate with my media person. Don't get excited, he's my father. So I'm at a medium-sized church. I don't have my own media person anymore as when I was at. So my father does my extenuous slides that I plan early, and I do my sermon slides. So now he and I need to communicate, because you can use different fonts in a large space, but consistency behind your head digitally needs to happen. So that was my first fail. Now, I knew to be far away from my borders because I had talked to my videographer earlier in the week and said, Pastor Jen, this is the one thing you need to do. So I tried to do it and epic fail. Now, this is a better background than what my dad had used because it's a little more muted. And I knew to stay away from the bottom border, but you can see up, epic fail. All I had to do to make this a better font is to take my text box and move it to the right and down a little bit, and it would have been better. So that's my fails and how we can learn from that in our media. Also, in addition to fonts, think about your images. The images you project behind you. Now you're I am at least going from large screen preaching where I had an 8 by 8 foot screen above me to the left or dual screen on either sides of my worship space. Now I'm going to a small screen. I'm being transferred my physical presence, Mr. Rogers, into someone's home, now with a smaller screen behind me. That affects the images we choose. So here is, again, I learned in retrospect, so here's how you can learn. So I started out my sermon simply talking about how do we get here now that there's no one in the worship space. This is a pretty good image. Again, the border's off, but this is a pre-packaged image. from Google Images. So, okay. Also, a bit of a note as we talk about images, I use a lot of Google because it's quick and easy. I type in what I'm looking for. I look for large pictures because they are less pixelated, of course. But I learned from my friend Randy Willis this week, Canva offers even better images that you can modify. And for nonprofits, their pro version is free. So I'll be turning to them a lot in the future. So this is a pretty good prepackaged image, as I just wanted to talk about the world and how we get here. And then I wanted to say, and you know, we all know about the shortages, and I use this image. This would have been a great image for Sunday morning projected on a large screen behind me. But the image got lost when it was a 3-inch by 4-inch image behind me on a television screen. So I learned very quickly what to do and not to do, even in your images. Think what you have to look at is not a lot going on, but conveys the message. It projects easily on a small screen, but gets people connected with your words. That's what we're trying to do, right? Because a picture conveys 1,000 words. Don't use 1,000 images. Use one powerful image instead of the details of something like this. And then something else I'm beginning to think about is when I binge watch, I want to be interactive. So it drives my husband crazy, but when I'm watching a movie, the other night we had date night and we watched the new Netflix movie, Spencer Confidential. I only could think of Spencer for Hire because one of the trivia was, hey, this is based on the same books that the 1980s Robert Urich TV show, Spencer for Hire. So I'm always trying to interact with what I'm watching. And I'm thinking about, oh, who's that actor? And I'll IMDb that. Now, you've become the movie and you're being preached. Worship is coming into their living room. So how can we get them interacting to keep their attention so they don't tune out entirely or just go to that text chain with their friends? So I do teaching notes every week in my sermon to try to keep people's attention in the pews. So how can I make teaching notes, fill in the blanks, or coaching questions easy for people? Have that up on your website ahead of time. Put it on the Facebook page an hour before, 1, for advertising, and 2, to help people get ready. Have them print that out. What's a Q&A sheet you can provide ahead of time? Children's bulletins. Keep people's attention. Have the parents print those out. What you can do, what I do is I'm not a lectionary-based preacher, but Communication Resource provides children bulletins that you can now digitally modify. Okay, have the kids working on a word search on the same scripture that you're preaching about, so those kids in those living rooms can still be engaged and interactive, and put the teaching notes for kids right there. So my daughter is learning to write the same word that's on the screen. Questions on Facebook Live. How can you use that media and that medium rather to interact? They can post questions. I'm not ready yet, but one week I'm going to put the sermon topic out ahead of time. I'll advertise the scripture the next day. And then as I'm preaching, get them interacting by asking questions. And then what questions can I answer during the sermon? Or just like this webinar, take a moment to, at the end, we're going to do Q&A. Well, So you have a closing song or special music. You read over the Facebook Live and you go into another section of your sermon where you answer their questions. So how can you, the coaching question is, be thinking about how can I interact with people even though they're not there in person to interact with, and how can I keep them engaged? That Mr. Rogers illustration is really the best because he got us interacting. Or if you're another Gen Xer, I'm sorry to only use some Gen X images and metaphors here, but picture pages. We all had a picture page magnifying glass that we would put in front of us, and if we didn't own that toy, we'd still hold it up and interact with LeVar Burton, and then we'd have the picture pages ahead of time. Think of your sermon as a picture page. What can you have for them to do? Sorry, I'm going to write that down right now on my notes for when I teach this Monday so I don't forget, because that just came to me. Because how can we interact with our viewers in the same way? Because the dog's going to want to go out. The baby's going to need fed because there isn't childcare available. The older people are going to get bored. How can we keep their attention? All right. Okay, here we go. So as I thought about the normal order of worship, so we've got the sermon and special music, and you may have a hymn or another song. Then I follow the traditional order. So after the sermon comes the offering. So how do you take an offering when there's no one there in your presence to take an offering? So I am a coach, and I am also a church executive through the National Institute on Church Finance and Administration, and I wrote my thesis on giving. I love to talk and preach about money. Love it. And I have the gift of the spiritual gift of generosity, and more, I practice this spiritual discipline of tithing. So I love to engage people in that. So whether you are doing it digitally or in person, I highly love the Giving Talk. The Giving Talk is 3 minutes, 2 minutes, right before the offering, that highlights the importance of this spiritual discipline. And so the ways to do that right now is simply connect with people. And so here's how I saw, here's a Giving Talk I would use digitally in this time. I saw 3 God moments this week of how your giving is changing our world. 1, we have had over 400 views on Facebook this week of our worship. You make Facebook Live and Ustream happen by how you give. We've been able to give out free toilet paper in front of our church sign on nice days so that people in our community know that Fishburne cares. You make that possible by our giving. So here are the ways that you can give, even though we don't have an offering plate this morning. That's a Giving Talk. And then highlight ways to give. Put it on, make it easy, put it on your website. On our website, we have ACH. I don't call it ACH, but this is a direct bank-to-bank transfer, and it's going to be your lowest fee possible. You're just going to simply pay maybe a penny per transaction. Some banks charge up to 8 cents per transaction. And so I call it e-giving. If you'd like to e-give, we have a form directly on our website that you can set that up automatically through our church office, print that form out, send it in, and we make that happen every week. Or we've got the give button on our website. You can give right now as if we're taking the offering. Support the ministries, because while the church building is closed, we are not, and you are making a difference. That's how I'd end the giving talk. And then one thing new I've added, because I think people want to give, and the offering is physical money, but it's also offering themselves to God. And I'm highlighting this. So in my part of my offering highlight is ways they can help in the community. And we have a long-standing support of our local township food bank. And so I'm highlighting that in these times. And I'm highlighting we call it, I'm in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so everything in Hershey is named after chocolate. So our help to our kids for free and reduced lunch is called Cocoa Packs. So I'm highlighting those two ministries every week, and in every conversation, every way I communicate, I'm highlighting the importance of the need to still give to the church. And here are the two other ways to give. And so I think that's still important. And for all of this, during your digital pandemic preaching, consider ways that you can do that with media as well. So when you're talking the giving talk, show, I'm literally giving out toilet paper on sunny days. So show a picture of the church sign that says free with the table there. Ways to give. Show the e-giving form or show the link on the website. And then when you say, hey, there's a give button, have a picture of that up as well. Make it easy. Keep it simple for people to give. Now you're getting my soapbox of how to make giving easy and talk, but I really think during the offering, this is critical. And I'll be honest, I didn't have the media ready on Sunday morning when I did my giving talk. So now I'm just remembering that I need to do that for my to-do list, because I think, especially as we talk about the offering on Sunday morning, we have to have that media to let people know and to make it easy. And then for the ways that you're helping in the community, have those websites up and available, or highlights. So for both of those, they're in desperate need of protein and tuna right now, and the shelves, our food banks in the area have been depleted. So highlight maybe just one way to give, or one thing that people can give, and have a picture of canned tuna if it's that, but with the websites or the drop-off location, whatever is unique to your setting, but make it that simple for people. If you want to know more about giving, that's my passion. I'll end. I will say I'm not endorsing them fully, but Subsplash got us up and running with a give button on our website in 3 days. And frankly, one of those days was my dragging my feet. So you can get up and running in 2 days with Subsplash right now. I do think they have one of the lowest rates for costs for giving. There's no hidden fees. Also the same with PayPal. That's going to be one of your cheapest as well. It may take a little more time. So that's make it easy, use visuals, and still talk about it, because if you're a local church pastor like me, I know the bills still need paid, the salaries need paid, and I'm just not thinking about that, but I'm talking about it in Sunday worship. Okay, so then the next, see, I can see y'all are chatting while I'm talking, which is great. You're giving each other tools, but again, that's what your people are going to be doing during worship on Sunday morning. So how do we keep them interactive and watching us? So what could they be talking about on Facebook Live together, even while they're listening to you and participating in worship? And so then part of pandemic preaching, I'm really even more convinced right now, is taking our discipleship tools into the week, because we don't have their rapt attention anymore for 55 minutes, an hour on Sunday mornings. You know, they come to church, they sit in those pews, and everyone else looks at them nasty if they're on their cell phones. Can't do that anymore. So how do we take Jesus into the rest of the week and tie it to our worship? So online discipleship. You know, so most of us, I think, are coaches. This was advertised through Coaching for Today's Leaders or Coaching for Clergy. So use the steps of the 8 building blocks that Val highlights. Now, I am going to talk about this more in an upcoming webinar that you're going to hear about in a few minutes, but powerful questions. We write our sermons using our coaching skills, but how can we use social media for powerful questions to keep people engaged throughout the week? Also, interestingly enough, Facebook posts, Instagrams get their most interaction when you ask a question. My friend Doug, who's a pastor he's got a rough appointment, Wrightsville Beach, right on the beach. He is great at interacting on his social media feed, and he's always asking us questions. And I'm a creeper, not a poster, except on his page, because he asks, what John Hughes movies should I watch during this break? Again, that's another Gen X illustration, I'm sorry, but it's a great one. We interact with powerful questions. So how can you use your page, pastors, and your church page to get people interacting with their faith, not just with the latest movies to binge watch? And then pandemic preaching is plan your sermons with that in mind. The same with action plans. Part of a great coaching session is it doesn't end. The coachee has to take that into their life, and you come up with an action plan. Awesome. Use your sermon as an action plan. So an example this week, I preached on solitude. Well, the great and classic Richard J. Foster, who wrote the book on spiritual disciplines, wrote a blog just a few years ago on ways to practice solitude. So every day this week, now the church Facebook page has ways to practice solitude in the midst of being shut in under a 14-day self-quarantine. How can they practice and put action plans? So plan your sermon with your social media in mind to get people engaged and to keep discipleship happening throughout the week. And I would say that's not just for pandemic preaching. That's going to be a long-term thing that we can learn to use. How do we interact with our social media page even more as preachers to get people to grow their faith? Then I think even more critically, I'm big on, as a local church pastor, discipleship tools. So with every sermon series that I provide, we have a daily scripture, and I have a weekly devotional or small group Bible study. I call it Next Steps, that ties to my sermon that I'm writing every week. So now, how do I get those out there to people when I don't have a bulletin to stuff to put it in people's hands? So it's going on. It's not there yet because I'm at a small church. Again, I don't have a media team to do this. I had it done when I was at the large church 2 years ago for 11 years. How joyous to have someone to do it for you. But I don't have that anymore. So now I'm thinking about how can I get this out there? So my volunteer website manager has agreed to do that, especially during this time. So I've got to get those up on my website, and then I've got to figure out how can I Instagram or Facebook those or tweet those out to my people so that they know they're there. Yes, I will refer to those on Sunday morning, but how can I keep that discipleship going in a pandemic world? That could be also, I'm just thinking about as we talk, or as I talk, constant contact. My email program, some of you might use Monkey something. We use Constant Contact, but now I need to attach those links, make PDFs, and push those out every week. I gotta get that out there to people so that they continue to remember as they're anxious, practice their faith. And then the next way that pandemic preaching is pushing all of us local pastors is online Bible study. Zoom, Google Meets, Google Hangouts. How do we create small groups in a digital world for people? Prior to this pandemic, I only knew one local church in my area, actually one local church period, that was doing Zoom online Bible studies and small groups already. And of course, that's a new church startup being led by two friends of mine who are wonderful, but guess what? They're both millennials. They were already there before the pandemic. Now it's pushing us Xers and boomers to get there. And my friend who is was teaching this Bible study long before, she said, it's at 8:30. We put our kids to bed and we tune in for 45 minutes on Zoom and we interact as a small group and then we're ready for bed. So how do we do that now when people cannot leave the house for Bible study? Other things to consider that I'm not an expert in, but I know it's important: background, lighting, and attire. And for each of these, I'm going to point back to the Mr. Rogers illustration. I am more and more convinced of that. I don't preach in a robe anyway, so I don't mean to put down my traditionalist colleagues or those of you who are watching, and Val Hastings taught me to say, and it's a new world. I know that I thought long and hard about my attire on Sunday morning. And actually, I'm wearing the same outfit that I wore Sunday morning because I wanted to be informal, but I wanted to grab your attention. So I know that I look good in black. And currently, my background at church is very light. So I wanted something of myself to pop out in my attire. I wanted to hide the middle-aged woman neck and get as much black so you could see my talking head as possible. Long term, I'm considering my background. The stained glass are very beautiful in person, even for our informal worship services, because it's just an amazing sanctuary. But for pandemic preaching, it ain't working. So we're going to talk, how can I get lights in there? How can I make something happen? My husband is going to be building me, he doesn't know it yet, but a PVC structure, an electrical conduit structure of a 12 by 12 black tarp backdrop, so that I can get some lights behind. And my cross is wonderful. It's made out of wood. It's about 10 feet high. It works for traditional and informal services, but you can't see my cross now because they've got to get closer to me to get in. So now I don't have a cross behind me. That's okay, but what can I do on my black or my white backdrop to bring Jesus there? So consider those things, and then your lighting. How do you light a space differently to bring you up and be able to see? There are resources out there that are experts at that. Midnight Oil Productions, Worship Leader Magazine has been having some blogs and some posts about this, and also Church Executive Magazine. Those are digital magazines to check out, and websites, worshipleader.com, Church Executive, you Google them. And just Google's an amazing tool to find out background for online preaching. Bam, you'll find some resources there. By far, I'm not an expert in those, but I'm again going with the Mr. Rogers image and how can I bring that? And then what didn't work for us this week? My cross. All you saw was a big wood post behind me. So, all right. So we're going to go to some question and answers for our last. Val, do I turn it over to you now? Also, I want to highlight, I'm doing one more webinar to follow up. This is Preach Like Jesus, coaching in the sermon writing process. I have been a preacher coach since I started with Val about 10 years ago. And so what we're going to be doing is looking at the building blocks of coaching and how do we apply that to preaching. Now, what will make this, so this is a traditional coaching course that now I've adapted to how do we take it online as well. So those are going to be two offerings you're going to be hearing about. So Q&A, Val?
Hey, thank you, Jen. And I'm going to reclaim it. And if you would still stay muted, but turn your cameras on so we can see all your faces. Jen, thank you. Love the Mr. Rogers reference. I'm old enough, young enough to know about Mr. Rogers. I found that very helpful to just get my arms around this. Yeah. Yeah, and you're quite a bit younger than me. So, Jen, we've got some time for people to just pose some questions or make some comments. And so we want to try and do this in an orderly fashion. So if you have a comment, question, just unmute yourself. And hopefully we won't be talking over each other. So who's first? Got a question or a comment?
This is Lee. Can you
Yes,
hear
Lee.
me?
Yep, go ahead, Lee.
Jennifer, you mentioned an interactive notes app at the very beginning of the webinar, and I did not catch that name. Do you remember that?
Yes, that is the YouVersion Bible app. It is the #1 downloaded Bible app, and it is in iOS and the Samsung Galaxy platform, whatever that. It's in all platforms.
Okay. So to access that, I'll look for new. What do I type in? Can you type that in the notes?
Yeah, if you put that in the notes, Jennifer, that'd be great. And we'll field another question. Thank you, Lee. Someone else.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have
Another
a question.
question.
This is Chad.
Yep, go ahead, Chad.
I wonder about lengths. You talked about having different little segments and sermon lengths and hymns. Do you have any, guidance in that area? Is it, keep it to a half hour? Does it matter? Those kind of things.
I'm not an expert in length, but I am thinking each worship week between 30 and 45 minutes because the attention span is so much lower. This week, I changed up the original. So my sermon was normal length for what I preach, but I broke it into 3 sections. And as I was writing the sermon, I tried to hear some of the songs that the worship leader and I had worked out ahead of time. And so between each section, I had a song. And then the second section, I not only had a song, but I had a second scripture. I'm pretty much a one scripture preacher. That's the way I was trained, and I'm a PK, and that's the way my mother preached as well, but that's the way my preaching prof taught us, one pericope. But what I used 2 this week, intentionally to also break up what they were listening to. So solitude was my topic, so I started with Elijah and the still small voice, and then went to the transfiguration. And another way that I'm breaking it up, my mom is a retired pastor, and she specializes in reading the scripture. So we're under shutdown, but I consider worship an essential. And so our worship leader is coming in. We're social distancing. He's 6 feet away from me on the stage. My mom came in, and she's going to do that every week until she's unable. The media guys are up in the booth. It's a couple. And my husband is the downstairs media on the screen. So that's the way we're doing it. And so we'll break it up between the three of us on stage. Also this week, my organist is coming, and she's going to do something on the piano. So to add, because I have traditional and informal worship going on, so I'm trying to also mix up each week to keep both of my demographics interactive, basically. My first week was all contemporary and contemporary songs, only because I, like you, was scrambling. So now moving forward, I'm going to mix it up. It is going to be blended, but I think I'm going to find that blended is more acceptable on screen because it's providing different options.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And Jen, I don't know if you're aware of it, but there was lots of interaction on chat while you were talking. So we were seeing what you were talking about happen.
A
During
great
your part.
illustration, because they're going to do that in their living rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Another question or comment? And just unmute yourself and jump in.
Yeah, quick question.
Simon, go ahead.
I'm in the UK, so we're on getting to a more stringent lockdown. And I'm just wondering whether we fixating too much on a Sunday when we have an audience that's at home 24/7 for a lot of people. And are we better off spreading something shorter every other day than saying, let's do it, because it feels sometimes that we're trying to do church online as we would do it physically. But if we have an audience, would we be better just saying, let's do something Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, or whatever? Just a quick question.
Great question, Simon.
I think, Simon, you've just hit on my first coaching question after we talked about the ways the gospel has been spread, and this is the pandemic. I think you have hit on what's next, because I am concerned about when this is all over. I do think church attendance is going to grow for a few weeks, like for us in the US after 9/11. We had a boom for like 2 weeks, and then it dropped off to normal. I think we're going to see that, if not attendance drop, because people are going to say, hey, I can stay at home. So then how can we interact and keep their attentions long term? So I think, Simon, you're hitting on something. Also, I can tell you some of the large churches in my area who have more of the resources are offering all of that. The small groups person is doing a small group twice a week. The worship person is doing simply a 20-minute prayer thing with music. Other ways, yes.
Very good. Thank you. I think I heard somebody else.
Dave Harris here.
Yes.
Hi, Jen. Hi, Val.
Dave,
Yeah,
who's
it's
like
good.
3 miles away from me.
Yes, I do. I drive by and wave. I can turn my video on so you can see me talk.
There you go.
I really appreciated this. I too loved the Mr. Rogers. I have my Palm Sunday script here in front of me, and I'm already rethinking some things and how to adapt in a continuing care retirement community, which doesn't change any of the dynamics. It may change some of the tools, but I just want to say thank you. And I see lots of the good comments and wonder what we as preachers have learned about ourselves and pastors making this journey, because I've had to do a lot of reflection, and sit myself down and have some come to Jesus moments and things like that. So I'm wondering what others have learned about themselves.
David, great coaching question. Jen, go ahead.
I see a lot of you talking about, to address kind of what you're talking about on the chat. Many of you are locked down, Michigan, UK, Simon. I think there is the ability to still do worship. And then how can you do it? Pre-tape it. Pre-tape everything but you as the preacher. It's very much like if you're watching Jimmy Fallon and his monologues from home, you can tell it's pre-taped and someone's edited it. So, your worship leader can film an amazing special music on their iPhone, upload it to you, and you can hit play as you're on Facebook Live in your office. Be creative.
Very good. Thank you. We need to wrap up, Jen. Thank you very, very much. Wonderful job. We have recorded this. We'll make it available for people if you'd like to have that recording, as well as I'm going to do my best to save the chat because there are some good resources that were saved there. So we'll make that available to you. David, you asked a great question. That might be a perfect way for us to end. What are we learning about ourselves? What are we discovering? So as a way to end, just unmute yourself real quick, answer that question, and then we'll have the next person go. What are you learning about yourself through all of this? Who will go first?
I'll go
quiet.
first. This is Naomi.
Thanks.
God has created us with an untapped imagination, so let's just go there. Like our lung capacity, let's not be satisfied with the average 20%. Let's go for 100.
Thank you. Next.
Dave here. I've learned about myself that I find a certain sense of peace, hope, and connection in the creative process. And doing that in both processing things and in preparing, whether it's via Zoom or being able to talk over the phone or whatever it is critical. Those connections are critical for me to be able to venture into any new territory.
Thank you. Who's next?
I think it's brought home to me that the building was never the church anyway.
Thank you, Simon.
This is Michelle.
Yes.
We have learned something in our church family, that we have a lot of potential to do ministry that we couldn't explore until the time of crisis. Now we feel like, okay, we could do it. So there are things that we didn't think about, that we were doubting, but now we have come to realize that, okay, it's easy, we can do it.
Very
so we
good.
are discovering our strength.
Yeah. Thank you. One or two others.
I'm Robin. I'm from Ohio. And for me, I'm enjoying the isolation to a degree because I also have creative outlets that do bring me peace and joy. However, I know that I like the human connection, and I've been allowed to do some other Zoom activities with other groups this past week, and that is the common denominator. Everybody needs that human connection. And
Yes.
so thank you for doing this to give us ideas on how to keep that going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin.
Hey, this is Roger from Clinton, Missouri.
Hey,
And,
Roger.
I just think this is exciting times. While we're going through a devastation, I think this is opening up opportunities for the church and for populating the kingdom of heaven like we've never had before. And so I look at it as a positive challenge to make us be creative.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Again, thank you to everyone. Jen, a special thank you to you. Appreciate everything that you've done today. Wonderful job. And as I mentioned, we'll make the recording available for you. Thank you, everyone. If I can be of help, please feel free to reach out. All right. Hey, enjoy the rest of the day. Take care.
Yeah.